The silence in the terminal was deafening. Officer Thompson's smirk faded as his radio crackled to life. "Sir, we have a situation." A nervous voice stammered over the channel. Thompson frowned. "Speak up." The next words hit like a thunderclap. "Christopher Williams is here." Thompson's breath caught. The Christopher Williams? The billionaire airline tycoon? The owner of this entire airline? The air shifted. Airline executives scrambled into action. Airport managers whispered frantically. Security personnel straightened their uniforms. Then he walked in. Christopher Williams moved with the quiet authority of a man who owned not just the airline, but the entire damn room. Dressed in a sharp, tailored suit, he was power in motion. His eyes locked onto Sophia, his wife. His queen, handcuffed, humiliated, he turned his gaze to Thompson. "Cold, calculated, deadly. Take those off." Thompson hesitated. "You don't understand, sir. She was—" Christopher took a step forward. "You put your hands on my wife." His voice was ice. "Do you have any idea what you just done?" A shudder of realization ran through Thompson's body. The cuffs came off. Fast, but it was too late. The next morning, Thompson's name was splashed across every news outlet. Fired, sued, his career in ruins. And Sophia? She boarded her first-class seat, without question, because respect isn't given. It's demanded. If you loved seeing justice served, let me know by dropping a 1 in the comments. Share this story, because no one should be made to feel like they don't belong. Have you ever witnessed discrimination firsthand? Tell your story in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe for more powerful justice stories that make you think, make you feel, and remind you the world is watching. And now, let's dive into this captivating story. Skyview International Airport stood as a monument to modern luxury, its towering glass walls reflecting the morning sun in golden hues. Inside, the air was crisp with the scent of polished leather and fresh coffee, mingling with the faint hum of classical music playing overhead. The first-class lounge was an oasis of exclusivity, filled with sleek leather seats and uniformed attendants offering champagne and warm towels to privileged passengers. Businessmen in tailored suits checked their portfolios, while socialites scrolled through their phones, waiting for their flights. Every detail exuded wealth, power, and quiet entitlement, a world carefully curated for the elite. Stepping into this world was Sophia Williams, a woman of effortless elegance and quiet authority. Dressed in a navy blue tailored blazer, pressed white blouse, and sleek slacks, she exuded the confidence of someone who knew her worth. Her deep brown skin, high cheekbones, and coiled natural hair styled in an elegant updo made her presence undeniable. But she wasn't here for leisure. As an international humanitarian and Harvard-educated attorney, she was on a mission. Her carry-on wasn't filled with designer goods, but with life-saving medical supplies for children in Ghana. Antibiotics, vaccines, and sterile syringes that could mean the difference between life and death. Despite her understated grace, she could feel the weight of the stairs. Some admired her poise. Others saw an anomaly, an elegant black woman daring to occupy a space rarely extended to her. Heads turned as she approached the first-class check-in counter. Some passengers exchanged quiet glances, intrigued by her confidence. Others, their expressions unreadable, made their judgments silently. She had experienced this before, the unspoken question hanging in the air like static electricity. Does she really belong here? Sophia stepped forward, pulling her boarding pass and passport from her purse and handing them to the check-in agent, Jason Reyes. She offered a polite smile, her voice smooth. "First class Accra, please." Jason took the documents but hesitated, his fingers gripping the ticket a second too long. His eyes flickered to the screen, then back to her. His brows knitted together slightly, and that flicker of doubt passed across his face. The same look she had seen too many times before. First class?" he asked, emphasizing the words just enough to make his disbelief clear. "You're sure this is your ticket?" Sophia kept her expression neutral, though a familiar frustration simmered beneath her calm exterior. Jason glanced between her and the screen, as if waiting for some mistake to appear. "Yes," she said evenly, sliding the ticket slightly closer. "That's my seat." Jason hesitated again, his eyes scanning the passenger list as if expecting to find an error. Just a few feet away, a white businessman in a wrinkled suit stepped up to another agent. "Morning, sir. Flying to London today? Let's get you checked in quickly so you can relax in a lounge." No skepticism, no second glances, just a smooth, effortless transaction. Sophia exhaled slowly. It was always the same story. A black woman in first class was an exception that needed explanation. She had two options. She could call it out, or she could move through this like she always did, gracefully, with quiet defiance. Years in courtrooms had taught her how to read people, to recognize the subtle ways bias worked itself into the smallest interactions. Jason wasn't outright rude, but his hesitation, his need to verify, to question, was a reminder that her existence in this space required proof. She kept her voice steady. "Would you like to verify my ID again?" Jason blinked, as if suddenly aware of himself. He cleared his throat, forcing a professional smile. No, that won't be necessary." He tapped at the keyboard, and moments later, her boarding pass slid across the counter toward her. Sophia took it, offering a polite nod, but as she turned away, she knew this was only the beginning. Officer Daniel Thompson leaned against the security checkpoint, his arms crossed over his chest as he surveyed the morning rush of travelers. His sharp blue eyes flicked between the passengers, making quiet judgments with each passing second. He saw privilege in the form of business executives and wealthy tourists, effortlessly gliding through priority screening without question. Then his gaze landed on her, the woman from first-class check-in. Something about her immediately set him on edge. The confidence in her stride, the way she held herself like she belonged in this space. It irritated him. He had seen it before. Women like her, too self-assured, too unwilling to submit to authority. His lip curled slightly. There was no way she had earned that first-class ticket. Maybe a husband had bought it for her. Maybe she was scamming the system. His hand instinctively brushed the radio clipped to his shoulder. He wanted to remind her who was in charge here. Sophia approached the priority security lane, her boarding pass in hand. She was already anticipating the next hurdle, but refused to let it shake her composure. The line moved smoothly until she reached the front, where Thompson stepped into her path, his bulky frame blocking the way. "This lane is for priority passengers," he said flatly. Sophia didn't flinch. She held up her first-class boarding pass. "I know." Thompson barely glanced at it before shaking his head. "Step aside. You've been selected for additional screening." Sophia's fingers tightened around her boarding pass, but her voice remained even. "Based on what?" Thompson's smirk deepened. "Random selection. Step over there." He gestured toward a separate screening area, one that was more visible to the surrounding crowd, where detentions and secondary inspections took place. Sophia exhaled through her nose. This wasn't random. She had just watched 5 white passengers breeze through without so much as a second look, but before she could speak, she caught movement in her periphery. 2 other security agents approaching, waiting for her compliance. She squared her shoulders. This was a trap, and Thompson was daring her to resist. Still, she refused to make it easy for him. "I'd like to know the basis for this screening. If it's random, what criteria determine this election?" Thompson's smirk twitched, irritation creeping in. "Ma'am, are you refusing to comply with a federal security directive?" "I'm asking a question," Sophia replied, her voice cool. "One that, as a paying first-class passenger, I have every right to ask." A few heads turned. Nearby travelers had stopped moving, their curiosity piqued. Thompson noticed and didn't like it. His fingers curled at his sides as he took a step closer, lowering his voice just enough to sound menacing, but not enough to be caught by the cameras. "Watch yourself," he murmured. "Attitude like that could get you delayed. Or worse." Sophia held his gaze, refusing to be intimidated. "Take her bags." Thompson barked at the nearest agent. The uniformed man moved forward, unzipping Sophia's carry-on without permission. She watched as they tore through her neatly packed belongings, pulling out medical supplies with exaggerated scrutiny. "What do we have here?" One agent lifted a box of syringes as if he discovered contraband. "Medical donations," Sophia said, biting back her growing fury. I have all the documentation. But they weren't listening. Another agent rummaged through her suitcase, lifting sealed packs of antibiotics, holding them up for Thompson's review. He nodded as if confirming something suspicious. That's a lot of medication, he mused, tilting the box in his hands. Strange amount for a vacation, don't you think? Sophia's jaw clenched. I already told you, I'm a humanitarian attorney. Those supplies are for a refugee medical camp in Ghana. Thompson let out a low chuckle. A lawyer and a humanitarian? That's a new one. The words dripped with condescension, designed to belittle, to reduce her accomplishments to something laughable. Sophia saw it for what it was, a performance of power. Then, without warning, Thompson reached for his handcuffs. This is taking too long, he announced, loud enough for the onlookers to hear. You're being uncooperative. A ripple of murmurs swept through the crowd. Phones were out, recording the moment the cuffs snapped around Sophia's wrists. Somewhere in the distance, a mother pulled her child closer. A businessman frowned but turned away. A group of college students whispered among themselves, angling their cameras for a better shot. Sophia's breath hitched, but she forced herself to stay still. She wouldn't give Thompson the satisfaction of seeing her react. He yanked the cuffs tighter. Maybe next time, he said smugly, you'll think twice before acting like you own the place. And just like that, Thompson thought he had won. He had no idea that he had just made the biggest mistake of his career. Sophia inhaled slowly, forcing her pulse to steady as the cold by the metal cuffs pressed into her wrists. She had been in high-stakes negotiations, ruthless courtrooms, and hostile boardrooms. But this moment, being publicly humiliated for nothing more than existing in a space someone else thought she didn't belong in, was unlike anything she had ever faced. I need to make a phone call, she said, her voice measured, refusing to let even a shred of emotion crack through. Thompson scoffed. This isn't some TV show, lady. You don't get a phone call until we process you. Sophia turned her head slightly, her gaze cutting through him like a blade. I am not under arrest, and I have committed no crime. You have no grounds to deny me access to my phone. A ripple of murmurs moved through the crowd. People were still recording, still watching. The weight of eyes on them seemed to momentarily unnerve Thompson, but he covered it quickly with a smirk, his arrogance as thick as ever. You really think you're someone special, don't you? He leaned in slightly. Fine, make your call. It won't change a damn thing. With a calmness that unsettled him, Sophia reached into her purse, withdrew her phone and dialed. 3 rings. Then a voice, deep and steady, filled the silence. Sophia? She closed her eyes briefly, grounding herself in the sound of Christopher's voice, her anchor, her unwavering force. I need you at Skyview International. Terminal 3 security. Now. There was no panic in her tone, no plea, just pure, controlled authority. Christopher paused, but she could hear the shift in his breathing, the steel locking into place. Tell me exactly what's happening. She didn't have to explain much. Christopher knew the world, knew how it worked, knew what men like Thompson saw when they looked at a black woman in a first-class line. Unlawful detainment, she said simply. Racial profiling, public humiliation, and Daniel Thompson. There was another pause, this one heavier. When he spoke again, his voice was quiet, lethal in its restraint. I'm on my way. And then he hung up. The silence that followed was thick, charged with something unseen but undeniable. Sophia lowered her phone, slid back into her bag, and slowly turned to face Thompson. His smirk hadn't faded, but something about it felt forced now, like he could sense something shifting but couldn't quite name it. Oh no, he chuckled, crossing his arms over his chest. Did you just call your lawyer? His laughter rang through the terminal, but it didn't reach his eyes. Lady, I don't care if you got some hotshot attorney on the line. You think he's going to come marching in here and do what? Threaten me? Get you out of these cuffs. He let out a dry, mocking laugh. Hate to break it to you, sweetheart, but I don't answer some overpriced suit. Sophia tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. I didn't call my lawyer, she said smoothly. Thompson blinked. Then who? But before he could finish, his radio crackled to life. And that was when everything started to change. The air inside Terminal 3 shifted. What started as scattered murmurs grew into a low, uneasy hum, spreading like a ripple in still water. A few passengers glanced at each other, eyes darting between Sophia and the uniformed officers. Others instinctively stepped back, sensing something brewing, something just beneath the surface. But it wasn't the passengers who reacted first. It was the airport staff. At first, it was subtle. An agent behind the counter stiffening as they tapped into the system, a security supervisor glancing at their tablet with wide eyes, and a radio crackling in the distance with sudden urgency. Then, within seconds, the ship became undeniable. Christopher Williams. The name traveled faster than any announcement over the loudspeaker. The senior-most airport officials, those who had spent years navigating power and politics, felt the weight of the name like a hammer to glass. One by one, their heads snapped up from their screens. Their conversations stuttered, then stopped altogether. A whisper passed from supervisor to manager to security director. Like a silent alarm no one wanted to be the last to hear. He called Christopher Williams. The Christopher Williams? CEO of SkyConnect? He owns half this damn terminal. Someone cursed under their breath. The radio in Linda Harper's hand, a senior airport operations manager, crackled violently with incoming transmissions. She yanked it to her lips. Say again. A rushed voice came through. Confirmed. Christopher Williams is en route. ETA 5 minutes. A sharp exhale. A glance at the security cameras, where the footage of Thompson handcuffing Sophia played in real time, recorded from multiple angles. The blood drained from Linda's face. We have a problem. Her assistant, Greg, paled. Oh, we don't have a problem. His voice was barely a whisper. We have a disaster. By now, passengers had started catching on. Some were still recording. Others whispered among themselves, sensing something bigger was unfolding. And yet, Thompson remained oblivious. Standing beside Sophia, he gripped her arm tighter, his thumb pressing into the cold steel of the cuffs as if to remind her who was in control. His confidence was unshaken. He had seen this before. Some arrogant, first-class passenger who thought they could bully their way out of a situation. He had shut them down before. He would shut her down now. Sophia, to her credit, remained eerily calm. Her breathing was steady, her eyes unreadable. That alone unsettled him. Why wasn't she panicking? You think you're smart, don't you? He muttered under his breath, low enough that the crowd couldn't hear. Think your fancy ticket and your attitude are going to get you somewhere? Sophia didn't react. You people are all the same, he continued, smirking. Flash some credentials, act like you own the place, and when that doesn't work, you... A sharp, electronic beep cut through the air. Thompson glanced up just as a flurry of high-ranking airport staff appeared at the security checkpoint. Linda Harper was leading them. Her steps hurried but calculated, her face set in stone. Behind her, Lieutenant Mark Davidson, head of airport security, moved with urgency, his radio pressed to his mouth. Thompson straightened, suddenly sensing something was wrong. Why was Davidson here? He rarely left the command office unless something serious was happening. A glance at the other officers confirmed it. They looked nervous now. Thompson's grip tightened slightly on Sophia's arm. No one had told him what was happening. And for the first time since this started, uncertainty crept in. Lieutenant Mark Davidson moved through the terminal with a speed and urgency that turned heads. Davidson had been in charge of airport security for 10 years, and in that time, he had handled bomb threats, high-profile arrests, and international security breaches. But this was different. His radio crackled again. Christopher Williams has entered the terminal. I repeat, Williams is here. Davidson clenched his jaw. This was about to get ugly. As he approached Checkpoint 7, he immediately spotted the problem. Officer Daniel Thompson, still gripping the black woman in handcuffs like he had all the power in the world. The tension in the air was thick, passengers frozen in place, phones raised, filming. His gut churned. This wasn't just a security issue anymore. This was a scandal unfolding in real time. Thompson. Davidson's voice rang out, sharp and cutting. Thompson turned, his usual cocky expression faltering for just a second before he forced a smirk. Lieutenant, I've got this under control. Davidson's nostrils flared. He had already seen the security footage. Thompson didn't have anything under control. Remove the handcuffs, Davidson ordered, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. Thompson's smirk faded slightly. He opened his mouth, hesitated, then crossed his arms. With all due respect, sir, she was being uncooperative. I followed protocol. Davidson's gaze hardened like stone. I said, remove the cuffs. But Thompson wasn't backing down. He knew every second that passed. His authority slipped further from his grasp. With all due respect, sir, he said again, this time with layered defiance. I'm in the middle of security screening. She refused to comply. I'm well within my rights to detain her. Sophia didn't speak, didn't even shift, but the look in her eyes was razor sharp. She was waiting, watching, letting him dig his own grave. Davidson exhaled slowly, pulling himself together. He had one last card to play. You didn't check her ID properly, did you? He asked, his voice quieter now, more deliberate. Thompson blinked. I what? Davidson took a step closer. Her name, he said, voice smooth but deadly. Did you even read it? Or were you too busy trying to put her in her place? Something about the way he said it made Thompson's gut twist, unease crawling up his spine. He glanced at Sophia, as if seeing her for the first time, then at the uniformed supervisors who had appeared behind Davidson. None of them looked at him the way they usually did. None of them looked like they were backing him up. And then the walkie-talkies crackled again. Williams is at the entrance. He's headed straight for Checkpoint 7. The murmur that had been bubbling under the surface exploded into quiet chaos. Staff whispered frantically into earpieces. Managers looked pale. Even a few of the police officers nearby straightened their uniforms, realizing the weight of what was coming. Thompson's mouth went dry. Davidson leaned in just slightly, lowering his voice so that only he and Thompson could hear. You just handcuffed the wife of the most powerful man in this terminal, he said smoothly. And he's coming. Right now. Thompson's heart slammed against his ribcage. For the first time since this started, his hands began to shake. The rhythmic hum of Skyview International Airport was shattered by the unmistakable screech of black SUVs pulling up to the curb outside Terminal 3. The vehicle, sleek, polished, and exuding authority, came to an abrupt stop, and before anyone could process what was happening, the door slammed open with a resounding finality. Security personnel at the entrance stiffened, stepping back instinctively as Christopher Williams emerged, his presence suffocating in its intensity. He didn't rush. He didn't need to. Power moved with him. Dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, crisp white shirt, and an open collar, Christopher didn't have to announce himself. The air shifted the moment he entered. His sharp eyes, dark and unreadable, scanned the terminal with an unnerving precision. He wasn't just looking for his wife. He was assessing, calculating, determining who needed to be removed. Behind him, 3 men in high-level SkyConnect executive attire and the airline's head legal counsel followed closely. Their presence alone sent a clear message. This wasn't just a concerned husband. This was a CEO with the power to crush anyone who had dared to cross his wife. Airport executives practically tripped over themselves to meet him, their faces flushed with panic. Mr. Williams, He didn't even acknowledge them. Christopher walked straight past, heading directly for Checkpoint 7, where the chaos had unfolded. His pace was steady but deliberate, his expression unreadable, but the energy radiating off him was undeniable. There was no mistaking what was about to happen. Thompson still hadn't moved. His stomach twisted as he watched the scene unfold in slow motion. The whispered conversations, the way the airport supervisors suddenly looked terrified, the sharp clicks of polished shoes on the marble floors as Christopher Williams approached like a storm given form. It hit him all at once. Her name. The realization made his blood run ice cold. Sophia Williams, the woman he had just handcuffed, the woman he had humiliated, the woman he had smirked at and told, "People like you don't belong in first class." His throat constricted. Oh no. Christopher finally reached the security checkpoint, his gaze landing on Sophia. And for the first time since this ordeal began, something in her steely demeanor softened. She didn't have to say a word. He saw everything. The cuffs, the way Thompson's hand was still gripping her arm, the scattered medical supplies, the weight of 1,000 injustices compressed into this single moment. Christopher turned his head slightly. "Take those off." His voice was calm, smooth, too smooth. It was the kind of voice that made people obey before they even realized what they were doing. Davidson nodded to the nearest officer, who immediately fumbled for the keys and unlocked the cuffs with shaky hands. Sophia exhaled slowly, rolling her wrists, the red marks an infuriating contrast against the smooth skin. Christopher's gaze lifted and locked onto Thompson. The color had completely drained from the officer's face. "Sir, Christopher took a step forward, and Thompson instinctively stepped back. "You put your hands on my wife," Christopher said, his voice still eerily quiet. Thompson couldn't breathe. I was just following." Christopher tilted his head slightly. "Following protocol?" The way he said it made Thompson's gut churn. Christopher stepped forward again, and this time, Thompson didn't dare move. "I want you to understand something," Christopher murmured, his voice deadly soft. "You're not dealing with some passenger you can push around. You're dealing with me." Thompson swallowed thickly, his knees dangerously close to buckling. Christopher let the words hang in the air, heavy with an unspoken promise. Then, without looking away, he spoke again. "Lieutenant," Christopher said smoothly, shifting his gaze to Davidson, "I trust you'll handle this properly." Davidson understood the weight behind the words. "Yes, sir," he said without hesitation. Christopher didn't spare Thompson another glance. He turned back to Sophia, reaching for her wrist gently, his thumb brushing over the raw marks left by the cuffs. His expression was unreadable, but she knew him. She saw the fury simmering beneath the surface, the restraint it took for him not to burn this entire place down. "Are you hurt?" he asked softly. "I'm fine," she said, her voice just as steady. But then she added, "They were rough with the medical supplies." Christopher's jaw tightened just slightly. "Unacceptable," he murmured. And just like that, Thompson realized something horrifying. Christopher wasn't done. This wasn't just about Thompson's career. This was about burning the system that allowed this to happen to the ground. Christopher's gaze remained locked on Sophia, his fingers gently tracing the raw red marks around her wrists. The anger simmering beneath his expression was controlled, but only just. His presence alone had shifted the power dynamic in the room. No longer was this about a cop exerting his authority over a black woman in first class. No. This was now about a man who had built an empire, a man with the power to destroy anyone who had wronged his wife. "Are you hurt?" His voice was quiet, but beneath the question lay a dangerous undercurrent. Sophia met his eyes, unwavering. "I'm fine," she said, her voice just as steady. She knew him. She saw the storm beneath his exterior, the barely restrained fury. Christopher exhaled through his nose, forcing himself to remain calm, but his grip on her hands tightened just slightly. Not in restraint, just a silent, unspoken promise. Sophia could have left it at that. She could have let Christopher handle this the way she knew he wanted to, with swift, unrelenting destruction. But she had spent her career fighting injustices bigger than a single act of racial profiling, bigger than one officer's abuse of power. And this wasn't just about them. "This is bigger than us," she said softly. Christopher's jaw tightened at her words. He didn't need her to explain. He already knew. His entire life had been built on the knowledge that power was a privilege not often granted to people who looked like them. His grip on her hands loosened as he slowly turned away, his dark eyes locking onto Thompson. The officer had gone pale, the realization of what he'd done sinking like ice settling into his bones. Christopher took a step forward. The entire terminal seemed to shrink, the silence pressing in on him like a vacuum. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." The words were soft, almost too soft, but they landed like a gunshot. Thompson swallowed hard, his body visibly stiffening. "Sir, I was just following protocol." Christopher let out a small, humorless laugh. "Protocol?" He cocked his head slightly, studying Thompson like he was nothing more than an inconvenience. "Tell me, officer, what protocol includes handcuffing a calm, compliant passenger? What protocol allows you to publicly humiliate a woman simply for existing in first class?" Thompson opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Christopher took another slow step forward, his control razor-thin, every movement precise and deliberate. "My wife is one of the most respected attorneys in the country," he continued, voice quiet but sharp enough to cut through steel. "She has dedicated her life to fighting injustice, to protecting people who don't have a voice. And you thought you could put her in handcuffs like she was a criminal? Like she was beneath you?" Thompson visibly flinched. Christopher shook his head, exhaling slowly as if restraining himself. "That arrogance is going to cost you more than you can possibly imagine." The silence in the terminal was suffocating. Passengers and airport employees stood frozen, caught between horror and fascination. Some were still filming, their hands gripping their phones, as if they were witnessing history unfold in real time. Thompson finally found his voice, though it was shaky at best. I didn't know who she was," he blurted, the words tumbling out as if that would somehow make this better. Christopher's gaze darkened. "Oh, so if she'd been just another black woman traveling alone, that would have made this okay?" The officer's mouth snapped shut. Christopher let the silence stretch between them, let the weight of the moment sink in fully and completely. Then he leaned in just slightly, lowering his voice, but ensuring everyone could still hear. "You don't get to decide who belongs," he murmured. "And you sure as hell don't get to decide who doesn't." Thompson had no response. Because for the first time since this ordeal had started, he realized something terrifying. This wasn't just about his job anymore. This was about to be the biggest mistake of his career. The tension in the terminal had reached a breaking point. Executives from Skyview International Airport scrambled forward, their previously calm and indifferent expressions now replaced with visible panic. They had done nothing when this started. But now, with Christopher Williams standing here, their careers were on the line. Mr. Williams, Linda Harper, the highest-ranking airport executive on site, rushed in, her voice breathless. "I assure you, we take incidents like this very seriously." Christopher barely acknowledged her. His focus remained on the man who had dared to put his hands on his wife. Linda continued, desperation creeping into her tone. "This is a terrible misunderstanding. Officer Thompson's actions do not reflect the values of this airport, and we—" Christopher cut his gaze toward her, sharp and unimpressed. "And yet, it happened under your watch." Linda visibly swallowed. I will personally ensure that an internal investigation is conducted immediately." Sophia, standing beside her husband, tilted her head slightly, studying Linda with the patience of a woman who had seen this routine before. The empty apologies, the frantic damage control. Christopher sighed, shaking his head slightly before looking past her to Lieutenant Davidson, who stood tense, already anticipating what was coming. "Lieutenant," Christopher said smoothly, "handle it." Davidson gave a single nod, then turned to Thompson, his expression now unreadable. "Officer Thompson," Davidson said, his voice even, controlled. "Effective immediately, you are relieved of duty." Thompson blinked. For the first time, his arrogance shattered completely. "What?" His voice cracked as the weight of the words settled into his bones. "You're fired," Davidson clarified, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. Thompson's world tilted. No, wait, he stammered, his confidence crumbling into panic. "Sir, please, this isn't necessary. I was just doing my job." Davidson remained unfazed. "No, you were abusing your authority, and you did it on camera in front of hundreds of witnesses." He gestured toward the crowd, many still filming, capturing every second of Thompson's downfall. Thompson's breath quickened. 15 years of unchecked power, 15 years of hiding behind his badge, all gone in an instant. "Sir, I have a family. My wife, my kids. I need this job," he pleaded, his voice breaking for the first time. Davidson's stare remained unforgiving. "Then maybe," he said coolly, "you should have thought about that before you put a woman in handcuffs for no reason." A heavy silence fell over the terminal, and then a single clap. It started small, hesitant, then another, and suddenly, the entire terminal erupted. Applause thundered through the air, a chorus of approval, of relief, of long overdue justice. Passengers who had been too afraid to speak up now cheered for the woman who had refused to stay silent. A woman in her 60s wiped at her eyes. "It's about time," she murmured. A younger woman with a recording phone shook her head. "She didn't just stand up for herself," she whispered. "She stood up for all of us." Even the airport employees, some of whom had looked the other way when this started, began clapping, unable to deny the power of what they had just witnessed. Thompson, still reeling, looked around, his face burning with humiliation. He had always thought himself untouchable. Now, he was nothing more than a cautionary tale. Christopher turned to Sophia, his features softening for the first time since he arrived. "Are you ready to go?" Sophia took one last look at the man who had tried to strip her dignity away, only to lose everything in the process. Then, with a quiet nod, she turned to her husband. "Yes," she said, her voice unwavering. "Let's go." The applause was still ringing through the terminal when Sophia took a step forward, her expression unwavering. She wasn't done. Not even close. Thompson's firing was just the beginning. It was too easy to make an example out of one man when the real problem ran deeper. If she walked away now, nothing would change. The next woman, the next traveler who looked like her, would face the same discrimination. And maybe next time there wouldn't be a camera. Maybe next time there wouldn't be a Christopher Williams storming into the terminal. Her voice, strong and clear, cut through the air, silencing the applause. This isn't about one officer. She turned, her eyes scanning the faces of the airport executives, the security supervisors, and the uniformed officers still standing in place. This is about a system that enabled him. Linda Harper stiffened, her mouth opening slightly as if to interject. But Sophia wasn't finished. "I've spent my career in courtrooms exposing systemic injustice. I know exactly how this works," she continued, her tone sharp but measured. "If we leave today, you'll make your statement, say the right things, and hope the cameras move on. But what happens tomorrow? Next week? A month from now?" She stepped closer, letting them feel the weight of her presence. "I'll tell you what happens. Another passenger, maybe a young black man trying to get home, maybe a hijabi woman travel with her children, will be pulled aside, searched longer, questioned harder, humiliated in front of a crowd. And this airport, the security team, will do nothing because you'll have learned nothing." She let the words sink in before delivering the final blow. "That's not going to happen. Not here. Not again." Silence. No one moved. Then Sophia laid out her demands. "Effective immediately," she said, her voice carrying the force of an executive order. "I want body cameras on every single airport security officer. No exceptions. No more situations where officers can rewrite the narrative after the fact." A ripple of unease spread to the airport officials. Body cameras meant accountability. They couldn't twist stories when there was video proof. "Second," she continued, locking eyes with Linda Harper, "you'll implement independent anti-bias training, not a mandatory online module that officers can click through without reading. Real, live, expert-led training. And it won't come from internal airport leadership or law enforcement. It will be run by outside specialists who aren't interested in protecting the system." Linda shifted uncomfortably, her jaw tightening. This wasn't just damage control anymore. This was real change, and she knew it. "Finally," Sophia said, her tone unwavering, "this airport will establish a transparent complaint system that doesn't automatically favor officers. Too many times, passengers report racial profiling, only to be dismissed. That ends today." One of the senior executives, a balding man in an expensive suit, let out a nervous chuckle. "Mrs. Williams," he started, voice smooth but patronizing, "these are ambitious requests. Perhaps we can take this conversation to a private office and—" Sophia turned her head slightly. Christopher stepped forward. The executive immediately stopped talking. Christopher had been quiet, letting Sophia lead the charge, but now it was his turn. "If these reforms aren't implemented," he said, his voice carrying the weight of an ultimatum, "Skyke and Neck pulls out." The words hit like an earthquake. A stunned silence fell over the executives. SkyConnect Airlines wasn't just another airline using this airport. It was their biggest client. Over 40% of international flights out of Skyview International belonged to SkyConnect. A withdrawal would mean a financial disaster. Linda's face paled. Mr. Williams, let's not be hasty. Christopher's eyes remained cold. I don't make empty threats, Ms. Harper. If this airport refuses to protect passengers equally, then we will find another hub. One of the other executives, a wiry man with deep frown lines, swallowed visibly, stepping forward. We would need time to implement changes. You have 30 days, Christopher cut in. The man's breath hitched. 30 days. 30 days, Christopher repeated. His tone was final. Linda looked like she wanted to argue, but she knew there was no room left for negotiation. They had pushed the wrong woman, and now they were going to pay the price. 3 months later, Skyview International Airport was almost unrecognizable. The changes Sophia and Christopher had forced into motion were now firmly in place. Every security officer wore a body camera, their actions recorded in real time. At every checkpoint, large, multilingual signs informed passengers of their rights, making it clear that they had the right to request a supervisor if they felt mistreated. A new, third-party complaint system had been established, ensuring that incidents of racial profiling or abuse of power wouldn't be quietly dismissed. And most noticeably, the security staff now reflected the diversity of the travelers they served. For the first time in years, passengers moved through security without the unspoken fear of being targeted for no reason. Sophia stepped into the airport that morning, this time heading to another humanitarian mission. She immediately noticed how different the atmosphere felt. Security was still strict, still thorough, but the tension, the quiet feeling of scrutiny that once weighed on certain travelers, it was gone. Then she saw him. Daniel Thompson stood near the community relations desk. His uniform no longer the crisp police-style attire he had once worn, but instead a standard airport services polo. The former security officer, once so arrogant, so certain of his power, now stood in a role far removed from his previous authority. Sophia hadn't seen him since the day he was fired, but he saw her, and his expression shifted immediately. For a moment, she thought he might look away, that he might pretend not to see her and keep walking. But then, to her surprise, he took a hesitant step forward. "Mrs. Williams," he said, his voice quieter than she had ever heard it. She stopped, waiting. He swallowed hard, clearly uncomfortable. His once unshakable confidence was gone, replaced by something else, something resembling regret. I never got the chance to apologize," he said, forcing himself to meet her gaze. His voice shook just slightly. "Not just for what happened that day, but for how I treated you, for how I spoke to you. I was wrong." Sophia studied him, her expression unreadable. She didn't rush to respond. She had spent her entire life watching men like Thompson, men who had the luxury of regretting their actions only after the consequences caught up to them. But this time, for whatever reason, she believed him. After a long pause, she finally nodded. "Thank you for saying that. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was acknowledgement." And somehow, that felt like enough. Sophia walked to the terminal, her step steady, her presence still commanding attention, but this time, it was different. There were no skeptical glances, no questioning looks from airline staff, no hesitant stares at her first-class boarding pass. The changes were more than just policies on paper. They were tangible, woven into the very fabric of the airport. As she approached the jet bridge, her eyes landed on a massive sign newly installed near the security checkpoint. The bold lettering stood out, impossible to ignore. "Everyone deserves first-class respect." She exhaled slowly, letting the words settle. It wasn't just a slogan. It was a declaration, a promise that what had happened to her would not happen again. It was a message to every traveler who had ever been made to feel like they didn't belong, a statement that they mattered, that they were seen, that the system would no longer work against them. A security officer nearby noticed her looking at the sign and gave her a small nod of respect. It was an acknowledgement, a silent understanding, a shift. Sophia took her seat in first class, placing her carry-on beneath the seat in front of her. The weight of what had happened, of what she had fought for, of what she had won, settled into her chest, not heavy, but full, purposeful. Justice hadn't just been served that day. It had reshaped the system. As the plane taxied toward the runway, she gazed out the window at the airport fading into the distance. For the first time in a long time, she didn't just feel like she had won. She felt like the world had changed. As the plane lifted off the runway, Sophia leaned back into her seat, her mind replaying everything that had led to this moment. The humiliation, the fight, the consequences, and, most importantly, the change. She had walked into that airport as just another black woman questioned, doubted, and dismissed. But she had walked out knowing she had forced an entire system to shift. A flight attendant approached with a warm smile. "Can I get you anything, Mrs. Williams?" Sophia glanced up, offering a small but knowing smile. The simple act of being addressed with respect, without hesitation, without doubt, felt like a quiet victory. She shook her head. "I'm good, thank you." Her fingers tapped lightly on the edge of the armrest. Her thoughts drifted to all the others who had faced what she had but didn't have the resources, the connections, or the voice to fight back. How many people had been forced to shrink themselves to avoid confrontation? How many had accepted mistreatment because they knew pushing back would only make it worse? She turned her head slightly, looking into the camera position across from her seat, the one that had been rolling since she boarded. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was steady and filled with purpose. If power can be used to oppress, why can't it also be used to create change? The weight of the question hung in the air, unshakable, undeniable. And then silence. The screen faded to black. The hum of the engines filled the cabin as Sophia gazed out the window, watching the airport shrink beneath her. The weight of everything that had transpired still lingered, not in exhaustion, but in a quiet, resolute triumph. The world hadn't changed overnight, but a door had been forced open, one that would never be shut again. She wasn't the only one who had won that day. Every traveler who had walked through those terminals, without fear of being singled out, had won. Every person who had ever been told, in 1,000 unspoken ways, that they didn't belong, had won. The reforms, the policies, the accountability, they weren't just words on a page. They were real. They were happening. And yet, she knew this wasn't the end. The fight for justice never truly ends. She turned back to the camera, her expression calm but piercing, as if looking straight into the eyes of everyone watching. "Have you ever witnessed or experienced discrimination?" she asked, her voice even, unwavering. "How did you handle it?" She let the question settle, knowing that for many, the answer wasn't simple. Some had spoken up and suffered consequences. Others had been forced to stay silent to survive. Some had walked away feeling powerless, while others had found a way to fight back. She leaned forward slightly. Because here's the truth. This doesn't stop at airports. It happens in schools, in workplaces, in hospitals, in courtrooms. It happens in places where people think no one is watching. But someone is always watching. And the question is, will you speak up or will you look away? The silence stretched for a beat, heavy with unspoken truths. Then, her voice softened but lost none of its intensity. If this story made you feel something, if it made you angry, if it made you think, then don't just walk away from it. She let the weight of that linger before continuing. Like, share, and subscribe if you believe in standing up against injustice. Share this story, because it's not just mine, it belongs to all of us. This is how we change the world. One fight at a time, one voice at a time. The camera slowly zoomed in, capturing the fire in her eyes, the strength in her presence. Because justice isn't about who you are. It's about what you're willing to fight for. The screen faded to black, and the message lingered.